Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Riley Tuff, and I am the trainee representative for CAHR 2022. This panel session includes a diverse group of trainees from various research disciplines. The goals of this event are to identify the changing needs of trainees, examine the gaps and opportunities that exist, seek input from attendees about training and funding, and develop a reference document on facilitating their advocacy, development, and research needs. We would like to thank CAHR and CAHR for sponsoring this event. Today, I'm speaking to you from the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We wish to acknowledge the land on which we gather virtually for CAHR 2022 is the traditional territory of the Attawadurun, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape-Wauk, who have longstanding relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. The panel today consists of myself, a PhD candidate from the University of Manitoba, Deetha, a PhD candidate from the BC Centre of Excellence in HIV/AIDS, and Leslie, a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Toronto, and last but not least, Tiz, a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Toronto. The format today will be a few very brief presentations introducing each panelist and our backgrounds. We encourage any audience questions regarding our experiences, whether that be training, funding, or our day-to-day life as trainees. Please feel free to type any questions you have for us in the chat. This is a live session today. So I am a PhD candidate from the University of Manitoba. I began my journey as an undergraduate in biochemistry, actually, and switched in about my third year to genetics. I started my master's in 2017 and transitioned to my PhD in 2018 in the Department of Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. I am cross-appointed at the J.C. Wilt Infectious Diseases Research Center, also known as a part of the National Microbiology Labs. I'm a basic science trainee, and my research focuses on how host genetic variation can influence HIV disease using a combination of computational tools and wet lab approaches. Each presentation is going to briefly cover some of the mandatory aspects of our training. There'll be similarities across Canada, but the differences that we have are important for informing advocacy going forward. So my program is pretty standard. It's about 5 years, and we have to do 6 credit hours of coursework. However, the department puts a very strong focus on public speaking. So we have biweekly journal clubs where we critically analyze high-impact journals, a weekly department seminar, and a weekly student seminar as well. It's very important to know how to translate your knowledge to peers and community members and learning how to critically evaluate science. As a basic science trainee, I put a large emphasis on learning new skills, such as understanding computer coding for my program. And a lot of those skills have been self-taught, and I'm happy to answer questions on that as well. But the training opportunities for trainees, this is where it's going to be different across Canada, and our panelists are going to have different opinions on this as well. I was part of the IID and GHTP program. It's a collaboration between Canada, Colombia, India, and Kenya to expose graduate students to multidisciplinary health research and a global health research perspective. I also use a number of online tools and online resources, most of which are free. So if you're ever looking at expanding your training landscape, those tools that you have in your toolbox, I'm happy to answer questions on that as well. As the trainee representative, I have to talk about how important CAHR is, but the trainee representative is going to change every year. So if you have questions on how to apply for that as well, I'm happy to take a moment to answer those. It's also very important for volunteering opportunities, giving back to the community. One such example that I highly recommend and is science fairs, where you can mentor young students in order to help cultivate their scientific prowess. The funding opportunities. So I'll mostly leave this to the other panelists today. I switched my degree in my third year, which means that my GPA was not very competitive for most of these awards. So if you have questions about small scale stuff, I'm happy to answer that. But any of these larger opportunities, I'll leave to our other presenters. And with that, I will pass it off to Deetha for a brief introduction. You are muted.
Wow, 2.5 years, and I still forget to do that. Just want to make sure that you're able to see my screen, right? Yeah, correct. So hi, yes, okay, good. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so like Riley said, my name is Deetha. I am a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia and the BC Center for Excellence in HIV/AIDS. And I have been so fortunate to have worked and studied on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. A little bit about my research. So my research interest lies in the intersection between HIV, aging, and chronic comorbidities. And I especially kind of like specialize on the use of large health administrative databases to conduct health research within the context of population-based cohort study, as well as on the analysis, longitudinal analysis of this observational data, and all of this within the realm of epidemiology, population health, and data science. So my program itself is actually in the Faculty of Medicine and a program called Experimental Medicine, which is quite interdisciplinary and has a lot of focus on starting research from day one. So I think the number of credits that are required for us were about 12 credits, I think, and the rest is all about jumping on doing the research itself. I myself started my master's in 2017, and like Riley, I also transitioned into a PhD program in the end of my second year, so it's actually a bit later. So in terms of training, I see my training, I guess, as can be stratified into three different domains. The first being subject matter expertise. So that would be training for me associated with my epidemiological concept, epidemiology of HIV, epidemiology of chronic comorbidities, and as such. And then the second domain will be kind of just technical skills. So this is more like also Riley says, like coding, for example, because I do work with large administrative databases, understanding the longitudinal analysis and conducting the statistical analysis, including operating the different softwares and the coding related to that, and some data simulations that I have to do as well, for example, and also just administrative databases, the management of it as well, and the proper use of it for health research, which is getting more and more common. And the third domain will be knowledge dissemination skills. So I think Riley also mentioned this, communicating science and our findings is really important. And I put there ESL, so English is an additional language for me. It's my second language. And for me, knowledge dissemination skills, being able to publicly, again, public speaking, to be able to deliver the findings of my research, and also to write in an efficient manner is really important as well. And I mean, obviously this training can be, obtained by different or through different sources, like some workshops that I want to highlight, especially for other trainees from BC, but also this is actually available for anyone really. It's population databases. So they're actually the data stored for a lot of the administrative data bases that I use for my own research project, but they do really provide very hands-on, very kind of timely epidemiology and statistical and data analysis workshops or webinars. So that's definitely a really good one to check out. In terms of conferences, Riley mentioned CAHR. CAHR was my very first conference when I was a master's student, and I had so much fun attending it. I really hope that we will have it in person again soon. Another one that I wanted to highlight is IWAD, and if there is any other trainees out there as well who uses HIV and observational cohort for their research, this is a really good conference that marry kind of like a HIV epidemiology as well as observational administrative data kind of cohort studies. So it's a small conference, but it's so on point for people who are, within the same kind of like research realm as myself. And then another one, which is something that I would love to go to, but I haven't had the chance. And this is more not HIV related, but I know that in my case, with regards to technical skills, that use of administrative data, ADR is administrative data research, and population data linkage network, I believe, conferences, and, just kind of like highlighting the importance of also, checking out these other conferences that are probably not exactly HIV, but that would enrich your technical skills as well. And of course, there are other platforms to get these trainings like peer mentorships or joining different working groups. In terms of funding, I think I want to highlight that I am a former international student in Canada. I felt quite fortunate that I became a domestic student just before I began my graduate journey. And what that meant for me is that opened up a bit more doors, open up more opportunities to get to different fundings, because some of these fundings may not be available to international students, for example. And CAHR Doctoral Research Award and CGSM is for the masters, where, for example, like some of the major awards that I have received. So the one in black are the ones that I have received, and the one in gray are the ones that I have heard. I didn't apply myself, but I think it's really good to kind of like bring up. So one thing though, for trainees who are from BC, I want to highlight BC Graduate Scholarship, because I think this is newly introduced in 2021, and I'm a humble recipient of that. And so I don't know if this is like widely known yet, but something to check out for sure. Another one I wanted to highlight is MyTax, which is a national research organization that has partnership with different universities and also the industries and government as well. And I know that they provide very generous funding. They're also available for international students. And another kind of type of funding I wanted to highlight as well is for travel and knowledge dissemination. I think yesterday during the CAHR STBBI session, they mentioned about the CAHR travel support to go to AIDS 2022. And so I also have received CAHR's, when I was a master's student, Institute Community Support Travel Award. I don't know if that has changed, but it's very similar to the AIDS 2022 support, except that this one, I was able to use it to attend other conferences. And whether they're national or international conferences. And I think that's a really good resource for students. And of course, your own universities, like travel award, department specific maybe, and conference specific as well, including CAHR, which provides some academic scholarships to attend as well. And there are other conferences out there. Yeah, so I think that's my introduction. And yeah, stay connected. That's my email address right there, and my LinkedIn if anyone is interested. So yeah, Riley, I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Deetha. I'll pass it off to Leslie for an introduction.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Just bear with me while I share my screen, please. Riley, can you see and hear me okay on the screen?
I can see and hear you.
Great. So before beginning, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. And for 1,000 years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. And we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So my name is Leslie Giddings, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Toronto's Factor in Mintosh Faculty of Social Work. I'm a social sciences trainee, and my research focuses on HIV, gender, and sexual and reproductive health of vulnerable and marginalized adolescents. And to do this, I use participatory and arts-based approaches. I work with Dr. Carmen Logi's SHINE Lab. SHINE stands for Stigma and Sexual Health Interventions to Nurture Empowerment. And I began as a postdoctoral researcher through a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, or SSHRC, a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship. And I've recently transitioned into another postdoctoral role funded by one of Dr. Logi's CAHR grants. So a little bit of background about me and what I was doing before. So my PhD was at the University of Cape Town at the School of Public Health and Family Medicine. You can see here some pictures. It's right behind the beautiful Table Mountain. And my research there focused on the health practices of adolescent boys living with perinatally acquired HIV. And I used art-based and participatory methods. So you can see an image on the bottom right there from my doctoral work. And I had been living for about 10 years in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm doing HIV and health research. And a couple of years before finishing my doctoral studies, I started thinking about what was next. And I wanted to move back to Canada to be closer to my family, but I still wanted to do HIV research, including in sub-Saharan African contexts. So I started looking for postdocs. And just in case any of you are like me and didn't know what a postdoc was, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about that. So a postdoc is an additional training period after completing your doctorate, and it's a time when you further your skills and experience. And maybe others here will have other perspectives, but from what I've seen, most people doing postdocs are trying to build skills and experience to an academic job. And this is also the case for me. And now I just wanted to share actually a little bit about a few things that I learned from the process of applying for a postdoc, seeking funding, and also doing a postdoc. So there's a few different types of postdocs. Some are externally funded, such as the postdoctoral fellowship that I received with SSHRC. And each one of the members of the Tri-Council, including CAHR, SSHRC, and NSERC, offer postdocs. Based on my discipline, I decided to apply for a SSHRC. And then there's other types of postdocs. So some might be provided through the university. For example, one of my colleagues in the same lab received a prestigious University of Toronto Provost postdoctoral fellowship. And other postdocs might be offered directly through a supervisor from their research funding. So something that I really wanted to emphasize is the importance about planning early. I started looking into postdocs about 2 years before I planned to submit my PhD because I needed to identify possible postdocs, a supervisor, and also put together a proposal. So what I did when I was trying to think about really what I wanted to do for a postdoc application is I thought about academics in a similar field to me whose work that I really respected and that aligned with my values. And Dr. Carmen Logi at the University of Toronto really came to mind. She also conducted HIV research with youth and vulnerable populations. Her research was global and she had a similar methodological focus. And her work also had social justice values, which was really important to me. So I knew I wanted to work with her, so I reached out and was proactive about meeting. And that's something that I'd really recommend to others who are thinking about doing a postdoc. Dr. Logi was generous and we ended up meeting at a conference in Amsterdam and she agreed to support my application. So then the next step was the application itself, which required a research proposal, as well as explaining how the university, the faculty, and the supervisor was an ideal environment to meet my goals. And this took a number of weeks to prepare. So again, I suggest started early. And one other thing that I thought was important to note is that funders often wish trainees to conduct research at a different place and with a different supervisor than where they did their doctorate. So rather than speaking about specific courses or conferences, I wanted to speak a little bit more about the tailored aspects of the training that I received and I'm receiving as a postdoc. So postdocs are often a lot more flexible than master's and doctoral programs, which have mandatory aspects. So although the requirements vary postdoc by postdoc, for my SSHRC, I was required to submit reports every 6 months on my progress. And otherwise, there was quite a bit of flexibility, which I really appreciated because COVID-19 definitely changed the initial plans that I had proposed. And while this type of flexibility is exciting, it's also important to set training objectives early and with your supervisor. So the training objectives that I had were first to learn how to write grants and to navigate the Canadian funding system. And I was really lucky that I had a supportive supervisor who involved me in writing a number of grants, including with adolescents living with HIV during COVID-19 in South Africa, as well as very young adolescents in Kenya through SSHRC, CAHR, and Grand Challenges Canada funding mechanisms. The other thing I wanted to do was to publish. I wanted to publish my doctorate and learn how to be a more productive writer. She suggested these two resources, which are staples on my desk and have been really helpful in helping me become a more productive writer. And during my postdoc, I've published 6 first-author papers, and I have a few more in review, thanks to this mentorship and those resources. And then the last thing, I wanted to learn more about methods and really progress how I thought about methods and the methods that I worked with, which was also really a great thing about my supervisor. So I was very inspired by her use of visual methodologies, and also because of COVID-19, we created some remote participatory methodologies using Facebook, as well as phone calls with adolescents in South Africa and Kenya. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because a postdoc can really be a time also to explore things, to try things out, and to creatively figure out what is of interest to you. Another thing that I did was started exploring more about knowledge translation methods that were also visual and participatory. And here you can see an example from some of our COVID-19 research developed by a South African artist. And what these different visual methodologies have allowed us to do is really engage with topics that are important to young people and that were challenges during COVID-19 and that we know are related to challenges around HIV acquisition, as well as adherence to antiretroviral therapy, including food security and mental health. So really, I'm just sharing those to encourage people who are trainees and also thinking about postdocs to be creative and use it as an opportunity to try new things. And I will leave it there for now, but of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Yeah, and just a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to input them into the chat and we'll pass it off to Tiz to introduce yourself as well.
Okay, fantastic. And so great to hear from the panelists and their stories. So thank you. Thank you to you, Riley, also to CAHR for the invitation. It's just a pleasure to be here. I'm looking a little bit more at the big picture, I think. And if I can offer one suggestion to you, it's kind of that it's important to explore the world. It's also important to trust yourself. And I think based on some of the items that we've heard already from the panelists, that both things are happening with these panelists, and I would recommend that highly. So in terms of my own journey, I began in mechanical engineering. I studied at the newly renamed Toronto Metropolitan University, downtown Toronto. I followed up by working in industry for many years. I also, later on, I went to University of Toronto, did a BA in cognitive science. In graduate school, I did a collaborative PhD in rehabilitation science and biomedical engineering. And as Riley has mentioned, I'm doing postdoctoral research and really combining these threads. So working in digital health, bringing the technology systems engineering side in, and working in health behavior change. So bringing the cognitive science side and the rehab side into the equation. The two images that I kind of selected here, to me, kind of resonated a little bit. And one reason is that there's this sort of open space in the center of these images. The first image is the Toronto Metropolitan University. Second is from the University of Toronto, although I wonder if everyone can recognize it. But in terms of that open space, it's because both of these images on the left-hand side of these campuses of this view is the Faculty of Engineering. On the right-hand side is the Faculty of Medicine or Health Sciences. But in this sort of middle open space, I think of it as a bit of a transdisciplinary space. And it's a very rich area to inhabit. And the transdisciplinary space can also be a challenging area to inhabit. And I can talk more about that later. In terms of mandatory aspects, Leslie already touched on this. The postdoc is actually quite flexible, especially compared to graduate studies. So it's those really specific requirements to graduate are much different once you get to a postdoc level. There's some, I'd say, I won't say negotiation, but it's a back and forth sometimes with the supervisor. Supervisors, I understand, will have different needs and different approaches. Departments will have different cultures. So again, I'm going to kind of nod to Leslie, who commented on the values that were important to her and how she highlighted those values as she was looking for a postdoc situation. So that's, very, I think, important, and it's much easier to do at the postdoc level. That said, there are skills development is certainly important. Writing is certainly important. And it's an opportunity to develop other skills as well, beyond the usual research and knowledge translation type skills. So there are all kinds of opportunities for training and workshops. I highly recommend actually the more in-depth ones, because I found for me that if something was really important to me, then it was worth spending some time doing. So, for example, the University of Toronto, through the School of Graduate Studies, runs a number of non-credit courses, really valuable expertise there that is sort of at hand. But as well, there are other opportunities, both at the doctoral level and post. So, for example, I believe U of T is like a partner with Coursera, and so there are many opportunities to study all kinds of things. Graphic design, for example, is an interest of mine. Just bringing up the KT side again, and that's one thing that's available to be able to enhance KT products. Things like motivational interviewing and health coaching are other areas that I've been able to explore with in the postdoc. Now, in terms of conferences, of course, this is actually my first CAHR conference, and wow, I just have to say I'm completely impressed and floored, and what an experience this is for me. So I'm personally grateful to be here. But there are so many conferences that are impactful, I think, that are outside of the HIV space. So just one example for me, for example, is the CHI conference. And that one's about human-computer interaction. I can say that I still remember the first CHI conference I attended many, many years ago. And that's because I saw a talk from someone who was an anthropologist, one of the first anthropologists hired at Microsoft, and they sent her to India to explore how people use mobile phones. So I was so intrigued that, first of all, they would hire an anthropologist. Second of all, that their interest was not so much jumping to solving a problem or jumping to any kind of conclusion. It was, hey, you know what, let's understand the problem first before we even get to any steps beyond that. So that understanding the problem space was so interesting to me. And I think it sort of has influenced my interest in systems engineering and how do we understand problem spaces. Now, in terms of funding opportunities, for me particularly, I took advantage of some of the smaller ones, and I was also fortunate enough to receive a CAHR strategic training initiative. And that particularly was related to interdisciplinary research. That specific fellowship, unfortunately, has been phased out. Now, I don't know if it's been replaced with something else, but certainly in my case, interdisciplinary opportunities in terms of funding has been important. And that's probably been, the CHR one was a very valuable experience, just not only for the funding, but for the networking with other doctoral and postdoctoral researchers and with faculty. So it was just a very rich experience. So I won't say more on that because I think our other speakers have talked quite a bit about some of the opportunities. But what I will do is just round out by saying that to me, you know, finding your own way in this world, there's this kind of very outward path, and that involves, for example, you know, follow your curiosity and what's alive to you. And there are so many opportunities outside of your specific area of interest that can really be fruitful. You know, one of the tricky things is bringing new things to the table, because if we all only study the same thing, how far are we going to get with our research? So it's really important to bring something new and share it with your team. But equally, there's an inward path and that element of trusting yourself. So if I can just end with one comment, it would be that there are times to be open in the world and to be open to the world, but there are also times to return to your own self. So trust yourself. Okay, and with that, I will pass it back to Riley.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists for those introductions. We actually have quite a number of questions. I'm going to go through them in chronological order when they came in. The first one is, I am wondering what each of you think the biggest challenge facing trainees is today. So I can take a stab at that one first, and then we can go in whichever order people are comfortable with. But for me personally, I think it depends on the type of trainee. Just briefly, I think funding is going to be a big problem for a lot of trainees coming in, and especially when younger trainees, so master's, PhD students, when that's based on GPA, a lot of these awards are based on the last 90 credit hours. But some students, you know, they move out during their undergrad, right? They switch their degree, there's other challenges. So sometimes that last 90 hours involves some of those issues that are very difficult to navigate, and you see GPA drops because of that. So I think funding and kind of the reliance on the last 90 credit hours can be difficult for trainees.
I can go next. I think the biggest challenge would probably be related to COVID-19 personally. And I know for me, because my research allowed me to work on it away from the hospital where I used to conduct my research, because, you know, finally they established an infrastructure where I could do and analyze my data remotely. What had personally to me, what that had created was a very different education experience, I think, particularly with regards to reliance with peers, because then, you know, it's harder to connect. You know, usually we ran into each other and you know, like those kind of like interaction sometimes, like, resulted in like finding new opportunities, hitting something that I didn't know before. So it takes a little bit, it takes even more efforts, I guess, to connect. But also the biggest impact is actually something that I put on my slide, but didn't really talk about it, which is informal training. I realized that I got a lot of my training informally. What I meant is that, BC Center for Excellence in HIV/AIDS, employed like a wide range of excellent, researchers, like statisticians, data analysts, like epidemiologists. And before the fact that we were all in one place, I would run into them again, or like, just knock on their door and ask questions in itself. Sometimes just, again, open the door for like new learning opportunities. And then, I'm able to get some of my questions answered. And I think, it's a bit different to email people, but also I think, basically, I think the biggest challenge probably would relate to that. So hopefully with things started coming back into some sort of normalcy, that also means that, we'll gain back some of these interactions that we lost.
I can jump in as well. I'd really agree with both of the panelists. I think funding is definitely a hard one, especially in contexts where sometimes we need space and not to be very stressed in order to create and to think. And sometimes those pressures and the pressures to, live and to eat could sometimes conflict with the needing to have a bit of space, as Tiz suggested, to think, right? I think also there's really been an increased push for productivity, at least I know at the doctoral and postdoctoral level, and productivity being measured very much by number of publications and number of grants. And I think there's kind of two things there. The first is that it actually feels really good to get work out into the world, and sometimes a little push is helpful, but it also needs to be balanced between making sure that you have the time and space to create quality work and things that you really want to put into the world as well. So I think those are the two that I would say.
And for my part, so first of all, I'll echo funding, absolutely, COVID entirely, pressures for sure. In my area, in this very transdisciplinary space, a challenge that I've constantly had is actually communicating my research and my interest. The difficulty, I think, in part is because the systems engineering approach that I use is not really, recognized wholesale. If I say, I'm doing, cognitive work analysis, everybody's going to go, what on earth is that? And it's very difficult to kind of explain this approach, even though, it's been used in healthcare and it's, there's some widespread use in certain areas in engineering. It's very hard to explain this. And it comes down, I think, partly to language. And I know I'm not saying anything new because, I've heard this from the beginning that, you need to actually tailor your language to your audience. But for someone who, my committee, for example, when I was a PhD student, half were engineering background and half were medical and health. And the medical and health would always wonder, what on earth is she talking about? And the engineers would be like, of course, that makes complete sense. So it's a constant conversation. But I think as long as there's some persistence that's necessary to be able to do it and to see, these people in health are really getting some aspect of what I'm saying, and to be able to, know who those friends are and be able to understand what parts are they getting and what parts are they not getting, so that you can tailor your message accordingly.
Yeah, all fantastic answers. It's not an easy question to start with, but thank you for the anonymous question. The next one that we have, we'll aim to have 1 or 2 answers per question. What key tip or recommendation can you give new supervisors who are working with mentees or trainees? Maybe we'll send that over to a postdoctoral fellow first. Or I could take it first as well. So the recommendation I would have while we wait for people to think about answers, especially when we're looking at master students or PhD students on the topic of productivity, it's important to talk about burnout and mental health as well. Making sure that students know that there are supports, knowing that if times become tough, that they're able to take some time to reevaluate what's going on and just get in a better headspace, in my opinion.
I can jump in there. I'll phrase this in terms of what I found most valuable from supervisors, and that's been their ability to, their openness and their ability to listen. And I think for me, I found that it wasn't so much, particularly as a postdoctoral researcher now, wasn't so much, oh, you should do it this way, you should do it that way. They really allow me to look at a situation and a problem and work on it and have my own input, and it becomes a real discussion. And I think that's been the richest aspects, and that's what I would recommend, is how does this become a very fruitful discussion, on both sides.
So I just wanted to say I agree with you both, and just wanted to probably add a little thing. It is definitely mental health and open-mindedness and willingness to listen. Absolutely. But I think just like another thing that came to mind is that we don't know what we don't know. What I'm trying to say is that, I can figure out that there is mental health resources, for example, on my own, but takes like a week after, or weeks after suffering, or then you could tell me that there is, and that is completely okay. I do something, and especially again, as a former international student with, a lot of fellow international student friends, sometimes navigating something that is, so maybe just a secondhand nature for a lot of us who's been in the academia, knowing what the resources is, whom to talk to in the library, to find out about systematic review, or fundings that are there, obviously is sometimes not so obvious for new trainees. And while I think that seeking those opportunities is a training in itself, I think as a supervisor, and I know I'm so lucky to have my supervisor, to help facilitate that is very valuable. And I think, again, also supports us, mentally in a way.
Absolutely. Great questions, great answers. I just want to reiterate what you just mentioned as well. I was actually the first graduate student in our lab. So having that support network was important for finding those funding opportunities as well. The next question we have here is, let's go back up. I'm curious if the panel can speak on how they feel related to staying in the academic track when careers in industry often pay better and provide a better work-life balance. Does anyone feel strongly about this right off the bat?
I know that I don't have an answer. I'd love to have a chat with the person who asked that question. I think it's something that's really different, that has kind of been brought about by how universities and the academic sphere have been very much commodified, and the decreasing abilities really to get jobs within academia. I know that's something that I'm currently facing and thinking about myself. And I don't think that there's a clear, I don't think there's really a clear answer, because I think any path has its benefits and drawbacks. I think for me, what I sit with is, in what spaces, what is important to me. So if I know, for example, that my values are important to me, and I would like to do something in line with my values, whether it's in academia or if I end up in another sector, thinking about that. For other people, doing a PhD or having a postdoc intersects with different life phases and family, that might become important, and money or work-life balance might become important there. So it's something that I sit with quite a bit, and I think is quite challenging, being on the job market. And I really am curious to hear if anyone else has any thoughts on that too.
I'm willing to jump in. Yeah, so considering academic or industry, it depends on, as you mentioned, which phase of your life you're in. So we're considering buying a house, so having those financial opportunities are very important for us. So it comes down to, can we afford to do the things that we want to do, and whether we can take the time to go down the academic track these days. Absolutely. If that's all we have on that, we can jump over to the next question. What recommendations do you have networking in the era of COVID-19, where meeting at conferences just isn't feasible anymore? And this is on the topic of looking for a postdoc position. I don't know if anyone that's doing a postdoc has any recommendations on networking.
I'll jump in. In some ways, I think volunteering is not a bad approach. Riley, you mentioned that there's a CAHR opportunity available next year. Just flagging that in case anyone missed it. It's a way to contribute. It's a way really to learn, behind the scenes, what happens. And I can say that in the situation I'm in now, one of the reasons I pursued it is because I happened to be on a committee, and that committee was, I think, co-run by my current supervisor, who I'm so fortunate to be in the lab with, Dr. Kelly O'Brien. So if I weren't on that committee, I doubt that this would have happened. So I think that's one very valuable thing to consider. But Deetha, I know, mentioned some other ways to really connect and network with individuals and look for supervisors. So but I think that one-on-one kind of, even though we're over Zoom and all that stuff, it's still possible.
Oh, and one thing, not me personally, but I know I have gotten messages from students who are interested in being a student with my supervisor. So they linked in me, which is actually quite smart because they didn't have to contact my supervisor right away, but obviously I mentioned it to her. So to my supervisor, that is. So I thought that's probably another way as well. It seems like, ResearchGate, like following people over there, and and LinkedIn are, two other ways as well to do.
If I could just add briefly, and I would completely agree, I think moving back to Canada during the pandemic and not knowing anyone in the Canadian sector, having a supervisor who was very generous with contacts was really helpful. I think trying to find ways to link with other students is really important. For example, even if it's an online writing group, where you come on, say hi, and put on a timer. I think that there's ways that aren't the same, but where we can mimic certain aspects of in-person stuff. And then the last thing is, also, it's a time of opportunity too, as cliche as that sounds. If networking is starting to look completely different, we can be connecting all over the world. For example, I learned how to remotely design and run a study that was happening in South Africa, right? And to work with new people from South Africa, including young people living with HIV. So there's also opportunities too, when we're not too tired and zoomed out,
Absolutely. I'll touch on some other aspects at the end of this, but even this discussion right now is giving me some great ideas. So I'll take this next question, and then I'll move on to the next one as well. I think the success of a training environment really depends on your supervisor. I wonder how funders can have a role to play beyond funding. I don't know if this is referring to like organizations or companies like those that are supporting CAHR, but I think workshops are a fantastic way. But I tend to find as a graduate student, workshops aren't well attended during the year. Maybe that's because people have experiments, maybe they have other obligations. But when I need to learn a new skill like RNA sequencing or something like that, I typically turn to previous publications, but maybe turning towards funders for getting more hands-on experience, whether that's workshops, whether or not that's like an in-person workshop, would actually be very beneficial in my opinion. But if anyone has anything briefly to add on that, you can. Otherwise, we'll move to the next question as well. Next question it is. Very important questions though. I big thank you to everyone who has inputted questions into the chat right now. The next question is, how would you suggest navigating the decision to take the tenure track pathway versus exploring work in industry? For example, an anthropologist at Microsoft. It seems like assistant professor jobs are becoming rarer and rarer in Canada.
Okay, since that was the example that I raised, I'll take a shot at this one. I'm going to say that, you know, a lot of it depends really on your own internal motivation and your interest. That's why I kept on going back to the idea of, you know, trust yourself. Yes, my take too is that certainly there are opportunities in industry. There may be more money in industry. I don't have a pulse on that right now. But moving to industry is not without issues as well. So it's not like people don't get laid off, they do. It's not that, you know, industries don't change. We're full of disruption in industry. So it's, you know, that's why I go back to do the thing that you feel most alive, because that's the place that you'll thrive. And so then it doesn't matter if you're in industry or in academia, because you'll be doing the thing that you'll love, and you'll be probably be doing a really good job at it. So that's my 2 cents.
I think the other question was quite similar earlier, and again, this is something I sit with all the time, knowing that especially a postdoc is a time-limited transitionary period usually, and as much as, you know, it's my first choice and deep desire to be an academic, but I'm also aware that in a very competitive space, regardless of how many publications I get, of how hard I try, how innovative my research might be, that might not be possible. And I guess what I sit with is, how can I show up for what I really want? Also be aware and start to just become aware of what else is out there that could also be good. And then kind of think about it as part art and part science, you know, the science being what we show up and do, and the art being sometimes how things shake out. And not being also too hard on myself if that isn't what ends up happening, because I think it's very easy to take this, to take it personally. In academia can, you know, you face all sorts of criticisms and setbacks. So yeah, that's my thought on that.
Thank you both. So we have, what time is it? Okay, yeah, we got some time left. We have a few questions. I just want to say that all of these questions coming in are fantastic. If we don't get time to answering them, I'll do my best to include these in the document that we're writing up afterwards. So the purpose of this session was to start the discussion to create a document for the advocacy for trainees. So even if we don't answer the questions here, they'll definitely go towards creating that document. However, on that note, one of the questions that came up was, maybe we'll answer this one briefly. What can organizations like CAHR or others do to support your training and development as a researcher? Maybe I will take that one quickly, unless anyone has thoughts on it. I think CAHR is doing a good first step with the trainee forum. It's the first year that this is running. And I think that we need more opportunities to talk with masters, PhD, postdoctoral fellows from across Canada, having these conversations on what we need. And it's hard for one university or one student to make those decisions. So having networks like this are very important. But I'm going to go to this next question, and I'm going to direct this at Deetha first. If you could go back a few years in your program, what things would you do differently, if anything?
Oh, wow. I feel like I'm in a pageant contest, this the final round question. I actually don't have anything on top of off the top of my head right now. I know very personally because I did transition from master's to PhD in the second year of my master's, which is Riley, you did in your first year. And I know a lot of my colleagues as well did in their first year. That I wish I would have done that a bit earlier, because that is actually quite a big jump I found in just kind of the scope of research as a master's student and as a PhD student. That maybe that's the first thing that came to mind, but even then is okay. So I'll go back to that if the others have answers on top on the top of the head.
I just want to build on that too. More information on how to transfer from a master's to PhD, maybe having more standardization for that across the board. A very, very important point, because I know that can differ a little bit for trainees. Does anybody have any recommendations? We got 3 minutes on things that they thought they did well, that they might recommend to people who are thinking back and trying to figure out what they did differently. For myself, I really chose where I was to do my PhD based on the location. I grew up in Manitoba. I've lived here my whole life. There's nothing wrong with picking a location that's close to home, as long as it has the program that you're interested in, because it really gives you a strong support network, which is essential for doing graduate studies, in my opinion. But I know there are benefits and downfalls of picking the same location. So if anyone wants to add to that quickly, they can too.
Well, building off to that, it's just that especially for PhD in terms of a graduate program, it is a long program. It is longer than many Hollywood marriages. So I'm just saying that Riley says, it is important to kind of see things even beyond just things that look good on your CVs. Do you like the city? Do you think you'll be happy there? Or should you visit first? If you have, I know that comes from a privileged point of view too, to be able to pick and choose, to be honest. But it's important. For example, that's your, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about connecting with other students in the research center that you're you'd like to join, because to find out do they have good supports for trainees, for example, and so basically also look at things outside of things that look good on resume.
Absolutely. We have maybe we can try to do a very brief answer to this one because it's an important question. How should international students whose first language is not English and lack the knowledge of local culture make connections with supervisors and meet people? We'll have to do a quick answer for this, otherwise I will get flagged for time.
Well, I just want to say that I know. Sorry, I feel like if anybody else wants to jump on, please. But right away that came to mind, attending orientation, and actually, I think it does require students to have to put themselves out there. But I think I want to speak that I don't think personally we could be better at that too. The thing is, I remember when I wasn't as confident about my English, then I wouldn't speak up. That I felt really bad for actually even asking questions to begin with, right? So I think if anything, yes, and I think using resources from the international department in respective universities is definitely like the way to go. But also, I think we do need more of that outreach, realizing that there are obstacles for these students to seek these opportunities in the first place.
I have been informed that we have a little bit of extra time to answer any remaining questions as well. But I just want to reiterate, coming out of this conference and having this forum for the first time, it's so nice to be able to talk with other trainees about this, that maybe we should try to organize more things like this in the future to talk about the advocacy of trainees and really just get different opinions on what the trainee landscape is like. So if there's any final questions, we have one comment, great discussion. Thank you for that. But I would just want to once again thank the funders of this session, CIHR, and CAHR for this, as well as all of our panelists. Thank you so much for participating in this today, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thanks, Riley. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.